Madam Deputy Speaker, if the worst thing that the Irish could say of the European Union is that they made them vote twice, I can imagine they have a lot worse things to say about their relationship and their union with England. But anyway, this week, Madam Deputy Speaker, we had a sterling reminder from the United Kingdom Supreme Court that in the UK we live in a constitutional democracy with checks and balances on executive power. And we were also reminded, Madam Deputy Speaker, that for so long as Scotland remains part of this union, Scots law and the Scottish judiciary are deserving of respect. Because let us not forget that the 11 UK Supreme Court justices followed the unanimous decision of the 3 judges in Scotland's highest court, the Inner House of the Court of Session. And in Scotland, our democratic constitutional tradition goes back to the declaration of Arbroath in 1320, which we'll be celebrating 700 years of next year, and the claim of right in 1689. And the principle of those documents is that neither the sovereign nor the government is above the law. And it was very refreshing to hear Lady Hale remind us that the same has been the position in England since at least 1611, when she said in her statement on Tuesday that as long ago as 1611, the court in England held that the king, who was then the government, hath no prerogative but that which the law of the land allows him. So constitutional democracy means not a tyranny by the executive, but parliamentary democracy with checks and balances. And as Lord Drummond-Young said in Scotland's highest court, the courts cannot subject the actings of the executive to political scrutiny, but they can and should ensure that the body charged with performing the task of political scrutiny, that is Parliament, is able to do so. So, Madam Deputy Speaker, I don't think anyone on the benches behind me will take any lectures from the Conservative and Unionist Party about the importance of democracy when it was their leader who tried to shut down parliamentary democracy for 5 weeks at a time of constitutional crisis in the UK. And of course, what Lady Hale stressed was that there are two... Well, I'm very happy to take an intervention if the learned gentleman wants to make one.
Offer me the chance to intervene. The point I'm making is we've had this huge national drama over the past couple of weeks as to whether the prorogation will be ended, because so many members of Parliament were so extremely zealous to attend and to address the issue of Brexit. And look at the benches. I think there are almost as many SNP members here as Labour members, and that's it, and there's only 4 of them.
I think perhaps if the government brought some proper business forward, you would find that there would be more people here, Madam Deputy Speaker. But anyway, I want to return to what Lady Hale said, because it's really not very... The judgment of the Supreme Court this week wasn't really very complicated, and many people who spoke yesterday on the government benches suggested that it made new law. It didn't. Lady Hale was simply expressing a principle that goes far back in the Scottish constitutional tradition and also in the English tradition, that the government is not above the law. And she stressed 2 principles of our democracy: parliamentary sovereignty and parliamentary accountability, and that the executive must be accountable to Parliament. And it puzzles me that so many parliamentarians thought that this was a novel statement of the British Constitution. But I think perhaps the reason for that is because of the lack of a written constitution in the United Kingdom. And many members in this House, particularly the opposition benches, will be familiar with the writings of Justice Albie Sachs of the South African Supreme Court, a great jurist and freedom fighter. And when he sat down to write the constitution of the new South Africa, he was shocked to find that Britain, who he was looking to for guidance, didn't have a written constitution. And I think one of the things that the Brexit crisis and the horror with which the UK Supreme Court judgment has been greeted by some illustrates is the need for the United Kingdom to have a written constitution. But I'm afraid to say, Madam Deputy Speaker, that I won't be holding my breath for constitutional reform in the United Kingdom. The Scots are very familiar with the oft-mentioned promise of federalism whenever Scotland looks close to voting for independence. Gordon Brown is normally wheeled out to promise federalism, but there's never any appetite in this House to bring that into a reality. And there are many things that could be done to improve British democracy, but the horrified reaction to the checks and balances imposed by the United Kingdom Supreme Court last week show me that members opposite don't actually understand their own constitution and would probably find it very hard to write it down. Brexit, Madam Deputy Speaker, has thrown the constitution of the United Kingdom into crisis. In 2014, during the Scottish independence referendum, which I may say was a great deal more civilised affair than the EU referendum, well, nobody lost their life during the Scottish independence referendum. It's a myth. No, I won't give way. It's a myth that the Scottish Conservatives, and sometimes I'm afraid to say the Scottish Labour Party, but in fairness, not the English Labour Party, often like to peddle that the Scottish independence referendum was a violent affair. It wasn't. I was there. It was a celebration of democracy, and I'm pleased to say that nobody lost their life. But anyway, I return to the Brexit process. It's thrown the UK Constitution into crisis, Madam Deputy Speaker, because it has shown that although there are 4 constituent parts of this union, 2 out of the 4 of them voted Remain, but that has been wholly ignored. That could never happen in the European Union. If the European Union was taking a decision as momentous as Brexit, even a small country the size of Ireland or Scotland would have a veto, or even indeed the size of Malta. And the reason why this is important, Madam Deputy Speaker, is that while the Unionist parties were participating in the festival of democracy that was the 2014 independence referendum, they promised people in Scotland that we were an equal part of the Union, and they promised us an equal partner, and they promised us that the way to retain our EU citizenship was to vote to remain part of the UK. Both those promises have been broken, and the Scottish Parliament has come under attack, and constitutional conventions such as the Sewell Convention that were put on a statutory footing have had a carriage and horses driven through them. The end result of all of that, Madam Deputy Speaker, is that a recent YouGov poll published earlier this month showed that the majority of Scots want a second vote on independence. And of course, the last time Scotland voted for a Scottish Parliament, it elected a majority of MSPs who want a second independence referendum. And the last time Scotland voted for MPs in this House, it elected a majority of MPs who want a second independence referendum. Now, what's sauce for the goose is sauce for the gander, Madam Deputy Speaker, and many members opposite, and I'm quoting in particular the Right Honourable Member for Halton Price and Howden, the Right Honourable Member for Maidenhead and the Right Honourable Member for Torridge and West Devon, have said in public, and I quote, "You cannot keep a country in a union against its will." Now, of course, they're talking about England and the European Union. Well, Madam Deputy Speaker, it is going to prove impossible in the long term to keep Scotland in this union against its will. And if democracy means anything, it means recognising the mandate that exists in Scotland for a second independence referendum and granting a second independence referendum to the Scots, because that is what the majority want.
Maria Miller. Thank you, Madam Deputy.